In the heat of the 2024 U.S. presidential campaign, political figures often find themselves in unexpected situations that test their composure and resilience. One such incident involved Senator J.D. Vance, the Republican vice presidential nominee, during a campaign stop in Pennsylvania. This event not only highlighted the challenges political campaigns face in today's polarized climate, but also showcased Vance's ability to navigate adversity with grace. The unexpected turn at Primanti Brus. On a crisp Saturday afternoon in late September 2024, Senator J.D. Vance planned a routine campaign stop at Primanti Brothers, a renowned sandwich shop in North Versailles, Pennsylvania. Known for its iconic sandwiches, Primanti Brothers has been a staple in the Pittsburgh area for over 90 years, often welcoming patrons from all walks of life, including political figures. However, upon arrival, Vance and his team were met with an unforeseen obstacle. The restaurant's manager, caught off guard by the unannounced visit, expressed concerns about the establishment being used for a political event without prior notice. According to reports, the manager informed Vance's team that they could not enter the restaurant, leading to a moment of confusion and disappointment among the supporters gathered inside. Supporters' reaction. Inside the restaurant, dozens of supporters eagerly awaited the opportunity to meet and interact with Senator Vance. The news of his denial at the door spread quickly, leading to palpable frustration. Many patrons, in a show of solidarity, decided to cancel their orders and leave the establishment. Videos circulated on social media platforms, capturing the exodus of supporters and their vocal disapproval of the restaurant's decision. One supporter took to social media stating, "Went to Primanti Brothers restaurant in North Versailles, PA, to show support to J.D. Vance. The restaurant refused Vance and his security to enter. They told him he was not welcomed in this establishment." This sentiment resonated with many, amplifying the incident's visibility online. Vance's composed response. Despite the unexpected setback, Senator Vance demonstrated commendable composure. Addressing his supporters in the parking lot, he sought to diffuse the tension and redirect the focus toward the broader goals of his campaign. "It's all right, don't hold it against her," Vance remarked, referring to the manager. "She just got a little nervous. But it's a great local business, let's keep on supporting it, and most importantly, on November 5th or before, go vote, let's win this thing." In a gesture that underscored his commitment to both his supporters and local businesses, Vance ensured that the meals of those present were paid for, leaving a generous tip for the staff. He even quipped, "No taxes on tips," aligning with his campaign's economic policies. Primanti Brothers. Official statement. In the aftermath of the incident, Primanti Bros faced a wave of criticism and calls for boycotts from various quarters. To address the situation, the restaurant chain released an official statement clarifying the events. They emphasized that the lack of advance notice about the campaign stop led to momentary confusion among the staff. The statement read, "Without any advance notice, today's campaign stop caused some momentary confusion for our staff. However, Senator Vance and his team were welcomed into our restaurant shortly after and engaged with our guests inside and on the property." The restaurant further highlighted its long-standing tradition of serving patrons from all political backgrounds, stating, "Primanti's prides itself on being a staple of the Pittsburgh community and a proud American business that has hosted sitting presidents, politicians, and political candidates from across the spectrum for over 90 years.
The reporter opened her mouth again, but before she could speak, Karoline raised a hand. "Let me ask you something. You're free to stand here and challenge me, yet you claim you're being silenced. Doesn't that contradiction concern you?" A ripple of laughter spread across the room. Some reporters smirked while others hastily scribbled notes. The liberal reporter's face turned red, but she refused to back down. "This isn't about me. This is about the people who don't have a platform." Karoline nodded. "Exactly. And that's why I fight for free speech, so that every American, no matter their views, has the right to speak. That includes conservatives, who are often censored by the very institutions claiming to protect free expression. Silence. The reporter had no immediate response. She shuffled her notes, searching for another angle. Determined to regain control, she changed tactics. Would you condemn misinformation being spread by conservative media? Karoline's smile didn't fade. I would condemn misinformation wherever it exists. But let's be honest, mainstream media has been caught pushing false narratives time and time again. From the Russia hoax to COVID misinformation. Should I go on? Murmurs filled the room. Some journalists shifted uncomfortably, knowing she had a point. The liberal reporter, sensing she was losing ground, tried again. You're deflecting. Let's focus on the real issue. Your rhetoric has been called dangerous. Will you take responsibility for the harm it causes? Karoline leaned forward. Truth is only dangerous to those who fear it. The real danger comes from silencing dissent, labeling opposing views as harmful, and weaponizing the term misinformation to control public discourse. The tension reached its peak. The reporter, clearly agitated, tried to interrupt, but Karoline held up a hand. I think we've given you more than enough time. Let's move on to a journalist who actually has a fair question. Gasps echoed across the room. The reporter's face twisted in anger. Are you kicking me out? Karoline met her glare with unwavering confidence. I'm saying you've had your turn. There are others here who deserve a chance to ask real questions instead of pushing an agenda. Security stepped forward subtly, signaling that the back and forth was over. The reporter hesitated, then grabbed her notebook and stormed out. The cameras caught every second of it. The moment would go viral within hours. Some would call Karoline ruthless, while others would praise her for standing up to media bias. But one thing was undeniable. She had once again proven why she was a rising force in conservative politics. As the conference continued, the energy in the room had shifted. Karoline had set the tone. This wasn't just another political event. It was a reminder that she wasn't afraid to take on the media, and she wasn't going to let them control the narrative. As the door swung shut behind the frustrated reporter, the air in the room seemed lighter, like a storm had passed, leaving behind an undeniable shift in energy. Karoline adjusted the microphone, a slight smile playing on her lips as she scanned the room. All right, she said, her tone composed yet firm. Let's move on to the next question. I'd love to hear from someone actually interested in journalism rather than activism. A ripple of quiet chuckles spread through the crowd. The remaining reporters, some still scribbling notes about the fiery exchange, sat up straighter. A man from a conservative-leaning outlet raised his hand. Ms. Leavitt, he began, you've spoken at length about media bias. Do you believe there's a solution to the clear double standards in how conservatives and liberals are treated in the press? Karoline nodded, clearly ready for this one. The solution isn't to silence journalists. It's to hold them accountable. We need honest media willing to challenge both sides equally. The problem isn't that tough questions are being asked. It's that they're only asked of conservatives. When will we see the same scrutiny applied to liberal politicians who often get a free pass? A few reporters shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up to challenge her. They knew she had a point. The press had been caught too many times ignoring scandals on one side while amplifying controversies on the other. Before, another question could be asked. A younger reporter in the back stood up without being called on. His press badge indicated he worked for a major left-leaning publication. Ms. Leavitt, he said hastily, as if afraid he wouldn't get another chance. What do you say to those who argue that conservative voices already dominate alternative media spaces, creating echo chambers instead of balanced discourse? Karoline tilted her head slightly, considering her response. Interesting choice of words, she said. You say conservatives dominate alternative media. But why do you think that is? The reporter blinked, caught off guard. Well, it's because conservatives have been pushed out of mainstream spaces, Karoline continued. We didn't wake up one day and decide to create our own platforms out of boredom. We did it because the mainstream media refused to be fair. They shut down our voices, labeled us as threats, and forced us to find new ways to reach the American people. The young reporter hesitated, glancing down at his notes. But doesn't that lead to division? Wouldn't it be better if conservatives and liberals debated within the same media landscape? Karoline's smile returned. You're absolutely right. That would be better. But tell me, whose fault is it that conservatives were forced out? Was it conservatives who censored dissenting voices on social media? Was it conservatives who decided certain viewpoints were dangerous misinformation while allowing blatant falsehoods from the left to spread unchecked? The reporter opened his mouth, but Karoline continued. No, it was the very institutions claiming to protect democracy that silenced half the country. And now, when conservatives have built their own platforms, suddenly we're accused of being in an echo chamber. Funny how that works. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Even those who disagreed with Karoline had to admit she made a compelling argument. At that moment, another reporter, this one from a major television network, spoke up. Ms. Leavitt, given your strong stance against censorship, would you be willing to debate a progressive figure on a national platform? Karoline's eyes lit up. Absolutely. Anytime, any place. The problem is, they don't want to debate. They prefer to control the conversation rather than engage in it. But if any prominent liberal wants to sit down for an honest discussion, I'm more than ready. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she said was true. High-profile liberals often avoided open debates with conservatives, opting instead to attack them through media narratives where they couldn't be challenged directly. Just then, an aide approached Karoline, whispering in her ear. She nodded and turned back to the crowd. That's all the time we have today, she announced. I appreciate the fair questions. As for the ones trying to push an agenda, you'll have to do better next time. With that, she stepped back from the podium, shaking hands with a few of the more respectful journalists before exiting the room. Within minutes, the press conference was trending. Clips of Karoline shutting down the hostile reporter flooded social media, with conservatives cheering her on and liberals scrambling to spin the story. Some headlines read, Karoline Leavitt destroys liberal media bias in fiery exchange. Others took a different angle. Leavitt silences reporter in tense press conference clash. Regardless of the spin, one thing was clear. Karoline Leavitt had once again proven why she was a force to be reckoned with. As Karoline stepped out of the conference room and into the hallway, the echoes of the heated exchange still lingered in the air. Her team, waiting just outside, exchanged knowing glances. They had seen her take on the media before, but today had been something else. One of her aides, a young man named Ryan, walked up beside her as they made their way toward the exit. That was incredible, he said, shaking his head. You didn't just answer their questions. You exposed their entire game plan, Karoline smirked. They make it too easy. They come in thinking they'll trap me, but they don't realize I see it coming from a mile away. Ryan nodded, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his eyes widened. We're already trending. Karoline Leavitt humiliates mainstream media is blowing up on Twitter. Even some independent journalists are calling out the reporter for pushing a narrative instead of asking real questions. Karoline took out her own phone and quickly scrolled through the responses. Conservative commentators were praising her, while liberal pundits were trying to spin the story as her being hostile to the press. It was the same routine every time. As they reached the exit, a group of supporters stood outside, waiting. A cheer erupted as soon as they saw her. You're a warrior, Karoline, one man shouted. Keep standing up to the fake news. Another woman added. Karoline waved, taking a moment to shake hands and snap a few quick photos. Among the crowd, a young woman in her early 20s approached hesitantly. She held out her phone, her hands slightly shaking. Ms. Leavitt, I wanted to say thank you, she said, her voice trembling. I'm in college, and my professors constantly push leftist ideology. If you question them, they call you a bigot or say you're spreading misinformation. Watching you stand up to the media gives me hope. It makes me feel like I'm not crazy for thinking differently. Karoline's expression softened. This was why she did what she did. "You're not crazy," she assured the young woman. "You're just brave enough to think for yourself, and that terrifies them." The young woman nodded, a small smile forming. "I hope to run for office one day, maybe help change things." Karoline grinned. "Then start now, speak the truth, stand firm, and never let them silence you." As the young woman stepped back into the crowd, Karoline felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every attack from the media, every smear campaign, every attempt to twist her words, it was all worth it if it meant inspiring the next generation to fight back. Ryan nudged her. "We should head out. Tucker Carlson's team just reached out. They want you on the show tonight to talk about what happened." Karoline chuckled. "Of course they do. Let's go." As they climbed into the black SUV waiting for them, Karoline took one last glance at the crowd. The battle for truth wasn't over, not even close. But as long as she had a voice, she would keep fighting. Because at the end of the day, the real power didn't belong to the media, the politicians, or the elites. It belonged to the people, and she was just getting started. The SUV pulled away from the building, and Karoline leaned back in her seat, glancing at her phone as messages flooded in. Her inbox was full, supporters, fellow conservatives, and media outlets all reaching out after the fiery exchange. Ryan sat across from her, scrolling through Twitter. "You completely took over the news cycle. Even CNN is running a segment about you shutting down that reporter." Karoline smirked. "Let me guess. They're calling me a threat to journalism?" Ryan laughed. "Pretty much. But here's the thing. Most of the responses from everyday people are in your favor. The media thinks they control the narrative, but the American people see through their games." Karoline nodded, already knowing this to be true. She had spent years watching legacy media twist stories, suppress inconvenient truths, and push propaganda. The only difference now was that people had the tools to fight back. Social media, independent journalism, and alternative platforms had given conservatives a way to bypass traditional gatekeepers. As the car sped toward the television studio, her phone buzzed with a call. It was from Tucker Carlson's producer. She answered, putting the call on speaker. "Karoline, we just saw the footage. Incredible job. Tucker wants you on the show tonight, primetime slot. Can you make it?" Karoline exchanged a glance with Ryan. "Of course. Let's do it." "Perfect. We'll be talking about media bias, free speech, and that ridiculous attempt to paint you as a danger. It's going to be a great segment. See you soon." The call ended, and Ryan grinned. "This is exactly why they hate you, Karoline. You're not just winning these fights, you're exposing them in real time." Karoline's smile faded slightly as she looked out the window. "They won't stop, though. They'll double down. The media never admits when they're wrong. If anything, they'll start digging, looking for ways to smear me even harder." Ryan shrugged. "Let them try. The more they attack you, the more people wake up." As they arrived at the studio, Karoline was quickly ushered inside. The crew prepared her for the segment, adjusting her mic and doing final checks. She could hear Tucker's voice from the monitor in the background as he led into the topic of the night. "Folks, we've got a great show for you tonight. The mainstream media has been exposed yet again for what they truly are, activists, not journalists. And once again, Karoline Leavitt showed them exactly why they're losing credibility with the American people. She joins us next." Karoline took a deep breath, centering herself. She knew this was bigger than just her. It was about the movement, about holding the media accountable, about making sure truth wasn't drowned out by the noise. A stagehand signaled her it was time. She stepped onto the set, took her seat across from Tucker, and smiled. "Let's do this." Tucker Carlson leaned forward, his signature smirk playing on his face as he greeted Karoline. "Karoline, welcome back. I have to say, you've had quite the day. That press conference, wow. You took a wrecking ball to the mainstream media's credibility in real time." Karoline smiled, adjusting her microphone. "Thanks, Tucker. It's not hard to expose them when they make it so obvious. They don't even pretend to be neutral anymore." Tucker chuckled. You know, watching that exchange, I couldn't help. But notice that reporter wasn't even asking questions. She was making accusations. She was trying to frame you as some kind of threat, just for believing in free speech. How do you deal with that kind of blatant bias every time you step in front of the press? Karoline didn't miss a beat. Honestly, I expect it. The mainstream media operates on a script. They don't report the news, they shape it. And if you don't fit their narrative, they'll do everything they can to discredit you. But here's the problem for them. Americans aren't buying it anymore. They see through the manipulation. Tucker nodded. That's exactly right. They lost control of the narrative, and now they're panicking. But let's talk about the bigger issue, censorship. These same so-called journalists demand the power to decide what speech is acceptable and what should be banned. What do you say to people who claim free speech has limits and that certain viewpoints shouldn't be allowed? Karoline leaned in slightly. I say this. Who gets to decide? Who determines what's dangerous or misinformation? Because every time we've seen these restrictions put in place, they've been weaponized against conservatives. First they called it fact-checking, then they called it content moderation. Now they're just outright banning people. It's not about safety, it's about control. Tucker's eyes lit up. Exactly. And what's hilarious, if it weren't so horrifying, is that the same people screaming about protecting democracy are the ones silencing half the country. I mean, does the irony ever hit them? Karoline laughed. Of course not. They don't believe in debate. They believe in domination. The left used to say they wanted an open exchange of ideas. Now they want absolute control over what people can say, think, and believe. Tucker turned to the camera. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Karoline Leavitt is such a threat to them. She's not just pushing back, she's winning. He turned back to her. So tell me, what happens next? Because we both know they won't let this go. They'll come after you harder now. Karoline nodded. Oh, I fully expect it. They'll try to twist my words, dig up something from my past, or call me every name in the book. But the good news is, I don't care. I'm not here to be liked by the media. I'm here to fight for the truth. Tucker grinned. And that's why they're terrified of you. He turned back to the audience. We're out of time, but you'll want to keep an eye on Karoline Leavitt. She's not backing down, and that means the media meltdown is just getting started. Karoline, thanks for being here. Thanks, Tucker. As the segment ended, Karoline took off her mic and stood up. The crew gave her nods of approval, and Tucker leaned over with a firm handshake. You crushed it, he said. Keep it up. Walking out of the studio, Karoline checked her phone. Notifications were blowing up. Her team had sent updates. Her press conference clip had racked up millions of views in just a few hours. Conservative influencers were rallying behind her, while liberal pundits scrambled to spin the story. Ryan, waiting by the car, was grinning. You're officially public enemy number one to the media. Karoline smirked. Good, that means I'm doing something right. As they drove off into the night, she knew this was just the beginning. The battle for truth wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun.